I get it. You want to embarrass the committee. You want answers. You want transparency. You want to go through the discovery process. We all know that the wheels of justice in this country creak as they move. They do not move quickly. They do not move expeditiously, especially when they're the only clear fix for this is money. You're going to say, here's how much we lost out on by not being in that group before, because that is the only remedy you have available to you at this point. They're not going to put you in the playoffs.
No, they're not going to put us in the playoffs. I'm with you.
So that's it. You got money. Yeah, you got money. You got money, and you got transparency from the committee, and those are good things. But the point is, it's going to be a year down the road before you see any of it, and so much is going to change. Florida State won't even be in the ACC by then. They'll have already announced they're moving on. So, and the judge is going to look at that and say, how much damage do you really have? They're going to look at how much damage you really suffered, and you suffered some, but it's going to be mitigated to some degree.
I'm one of the few people who is going to just tell you that the real it's an end game in all of this. It could really be done overnight. Fox and ESPN could go in a back room right now and end this entire thing if they wanted to. They're getting the clicks. They're gonna have to they got to juice this for what it's worth. Heck, we all getting the clicks. Mark, you're probably gonna get a spike in views on this show. Everybody's shows are doing great right now. But they're gonna juice this for all it's worth. But they could just go in and say, all right, we're gonna let ACC, we're gonna let Florida State out of this. We're gonna put them in on Fox or vice versa, or SEC, whatever they want to, whatever the case may be, because Florida State is realizing outside of being in the playoff every year, you can't have guys, one team, like for example, Florida can't be making $85-90 million a year without before they even put a ball on the ground, and you're making 45-50.
Mm-hmm.
Like you'll never sit back and be okay with that. Like that's never going to be okay.
And you're right, and Mark knows I have been Don Quixote with this, tilting at windmills, that the grant of rights, this lovely document right here, the grant of rights is a travesty, because I get why they did it when they did it. I get why Commissioner Swofford did it to save the conference, blah, 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 blah. The fact that schools signed away their rights until 2036 is unreal. There are ways out of it. Part of the problem is that Florida State, at the time they want out of it, is also going to be boxed in with only one path. You can't claim conspiracy with the committee and ESPN and then expect to be able to be welcomed into the SEC, which is essentially run by ESPN.
Well, that's not who we want. We definitely don't want to be in
the SEC. You want the Big Ten. I
don't think the SEC wants us in particular. Yeah.
Well, maybe not. But let me tell you, the easier path to get out of the ACC would be to go to the SEC, because ESPN owning the ACC network and the SEC network could help smooth that path for you financially and help ease your way out. The way this is going to have to happen now is going to be extraordinarily litigious. Mm-hmm. And Mark knows I painted this absurd path months ago as to how Florida State gets out. And while I sit here and say I want the politicians out of it, there is a way to do it. And it is for Florida State to purposely and purposefully violate the grant of rights and force a lawsuit. And then have the Florida State legislature indemnify them against breach of contract lawsuits. There is a precedent for it. The state of Texas protected Texas Tech in the matter of Mike Leach versus Texas Tech University and indemnified the school and all of its public schools within its jurisdiction. against breach of contract lawsuits. It really only pertained to the Mike Leach lawsuit, but the state of Florida could do it, and it will
actually
indemnify.
have that kind of. Basically, you can only if, like, for example, if something happened to me on Florida State's campus, I can only sue Florida State for X amount of dollars. I can't go for the full. So
right. There's a cat. Right. There's a tortious lawsuit cap on it. This is going to be different though, because it's going to be contractual. It's going to be for a breach of contract instead of, a tortious lawsuit. So you need the indemnity from the state of Florida. I feel quite certain the state of Florida would do it. The Florida state legislature would do it. And it gets you out of the grant of rights because it nullifies. Because, this is an important part, very important part. There is something in this grant of rights that should be in there that is not. It's severely lacking, and it could cost the ACC, Florida State, and other teams. It's called a choice of law provision. All right. If you want to sue your credit card company, you look at your credit card statement or your agreement when you signed up for it. It tells you have to sue them in the state of Delaware because that's where they're incorporated. You want to sue your moving company like we did. It turns out they're all in the state of Florida, or they're all registered in the state of Florida. You got to sue them in Florida. There is no choice of law clause in the grant of rights. You are free to take that litigation to whatever state you want. So you do it in the state of Florida, then you have this Florida legislature indemnify Florida State against the lawsuit, and you are out. You are on your way to the Big Ten and Fox and whatever else. I've spoken to lawyers who are fully aware of it and have already been in the ears of the Florida State administration about it, that there is a path to do it. You basically have to blatantly violate the grant of rights and open up negotiations with the Big Ten and Fox and whomever else.
Who knows? One thing I do know about Alford is Alford doesn't make statements and doesn't make moves, doesn't say things unless there are things moving. I'll give him that. I'm on that front, but I will say this. This is the one thing that I've been petitioning, and which I thought, once I looked at it, I had no idea that the coaches poll and the AP poll are not under any force to identify the winner of the College Football Invitational as the national champion.
Correct.
And as I was telling Florida State fans, those are the two that matter. Like when you look at USC's national champions, one of their co-national, they were AP in one. The BCS was under obligation to select the BCS champion as the coaches poll champion. That's why I tell them, go out, beat a really good Georgia team, regardless of who's declared and who's hit the transfer portal. It's a brand. You're undefeated in the SEC regardless, which I like. Kirby Smart is a hell of a ball coach. And I've said this, I think I said this on this show, Mark, when we were looking like I don't want to be 1 or 4, because I figured if we were 1 or 4, that puts me up against Georgia. I want Washington, because I've seen what Washington can do against the Washington States of the world, the Oregon States. I've seen what they've done against lesser teams, even though I will give them props. They did beat a significant amount of top 25 teams. I've also seen our defense not give up, I think, 4 touchdown passes all year. I like our chances. But I didn't want to play Georgia. Not in the first game. I didn't want 30 days for Kirby Smart to break down something. This was also before Jordan Travis was injured. But I think we're in an interesting time, though, that you've got to – the only thing more American than apple pie is change happening when your pockets are tapped. The only way change happens is with the threatening of losing money or sanctions or things of that nature. So, I'm not opposed to it. The only reason I think Florida State fans consistently, because it's still relatively new. And 2, you've got people openly getting on their big platforms and poking the bear, like Kirk Herbstreit, they're giving Kirk the business. But this ain't the first bad take that Kirk's ever had before. When I don't like something, I just hit mute. Just push mute. Like Twitter is really easy. Facebook's a little more difficult. Instagram is impossible. Like you can't mute. You have to like not look at your IG. But Kirk is going out calling people epitaph. I'm not epitaph, excuse me. That's not true. Calling people slurs, a female dog, and saying people are doing these different things. And I'm fine for the talking trash. Just don't be surprised by the backlash. Paul Feinbaum is, calling it faux outrage, and this is no slight on you, Tony, but like if I told Paul I'll give up on this when he gives up on his hair. I'm going to fight for this as hard as he's fighting for the hair on the sides, and that's okay. That's everybody's American right.
Sure,
do what you do, but like if you keep going on your show, that's why I say really. Part of me believes, at worst, this was just something that was well played to be able to is generating a ton of talk. It's been like every time I turn on ESPN, it's what people are talking about. They're talking about it on Twitter. They're talking about it on podcasts. Rivals are saying, get over it. Everybody else is doing these different things. And I'm like, and get over it in the sense of if you were in the same situation, you would not be. You would be fighting just as hard and hoping that other people would listen to you. But you're right. Nothing changes this year.
In the event that there is litigation, the attorneys at ESPN would have done well already to tell Kirk to shut up, stop answering people's tweets, tell Feinbaum, you've already done 8 shows about this, move on. There's other college football stuff, other college sports stuff to talk about. The attorneys at ESPN would have done well to advise their on-air talent to stop talking about it at this point, stop responding to people, stop talking about it, and just, move on and move along, because anything you say is going to be part of the discovery process at this point.
My question to ask you is, we see what happens when you go undefeated in the ACC. If I'm Clemson, it'll never happen for Miami. We've been hoping this for 30. They've won 1 championship in 30 years. We've been praying for this. The original reason we brought them in was to have this happen, but okay, fine. Forget. We'll use Miami. They could come back and we use Miami if they go undefeated or lose 1 game. What is why stay when it doesn't seem like there's any fight? And regardless of what Florida State did, this costs everybody in the conference money. We're still doing the bowl revenue split, correct?
Correct.
So
it is costing everybody in the conference money. There's the new, I don't remember the phrase Jim Phillips used, but it's a disproportionate distribution that those who play in those postseason games get the bulk of it, and then the rest gets spread out. So it's no longer completely even distribution. Nonetheless, it is costing the in other words, if Florida State had made the playoffs, they get the lion's share of it, and then the remaining percentage goes to everybody else. But
here's what would have happened.
Conference and everybody else.
Here's what my point was: is that so Florida State goes to the playoff. We get 2 teams. We'll just call them all New Year's Six, just playoff and the other one. Louisville would have got the automatic buy-in.
Yep. Instead,
because of your cowardice, we have 1 school. SEC has 4. Would we know for a fact, if remove Alabama from this, if Georgia were a 1-loss SEC champion, and their 1 loss was out of conference, SEC would still be beating the table. We know the ACC team wouldn't have got in. Big 12, we won't even know what the Big 12 will be, but the not beating of the table, what does that do for the confidence of everybody else in the ACC? Because I think one of the things that's being missed, and I get it, amongst all the bitching and the hoorah and all this other stuff, is that a conference champion of a Power 5 was literally left out. And if that Louisville could have been that, anybody else could have been that. What do you think the other teams in the conference are thinking?
Well, let me answer that with a question. What was different that was supposed to be happening this year in the postseason? We were supposed to be at 12 teams already. And who killed it? Jim Phillips, Kevin Warren, and George Kliavkoff with the Alliance. They killed it. They formed a voting block, which was, for all the things that the Alliance never did, the one thing it did accomplish was it created a voting block to combat Greg Sankey's, omnipotent power throughout college sports. And it pushed back the 12-team playoff another year because it was supposed to start this year. A lot of this sits on Jim Phillips' shoulders and his poor management as commissioner of the ACC. So the other schools who are going to miss some of this revenue, millions of revenue, are upset at the playoff committee. They're upset at Jim Phillips. They're upset at the ACC. There's a lot of sorry for using this phrase, but there's a lot of pissiness to go around from these schools, and appropriately so. And if you're one of the others in the conference, all right, if you're Virginia, if you're Wake Forest, if you're NC State, if you're UNC this year, you're pretty upset because that money is extremely important to you. You are not the darling of the networks, Clemson, Florida State, even Miami. You're not on everybody's must-watch list, depending upon what the other games are that week. That money goes a long way, and you now don't have it. I have talked to I called 3 coaches, but talked to 2 because one didn't return my call, but who are in that second tier of schools in the ACC, and they're pretty pissed off, not just at the committee, but at Jim Phillips and, at others as well, that this is the way it turned out. It may have only been $3, $4, $5 million loss. That's a lot of money to some of these schools in the football program. So there's a lot of rancor to go around.
Although in a sense, I was just going to say, in a sense, those schools can only be so mad at the ACC because they just want the conference to continue because they don't have the outs and the paths that the top tier teams, they just want to continue.
They don't have other conferences knocking on their door.
So they're 39 million per year is just fine with them. They would just like to maximize that. And I'll just
which is the point. Which is the reason why. So when people are like, why does Florida State want out of the ACC? You just said why Florida State wants out of the ACC.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, I don't blame them for wanting out. I'd be beating down the door to get out also. Mark knows because I keep showing it, and Mark and I keep talking about it. This grant of rights is horrible. It is the fact that anyone gets locked in for 20 plus years to the rights, the ownership of their TV contract is just unimaginable.
But in Phillips' defense, too, again, there's 11 teams right now. We have the 12-team playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Oklahoma would be an odd man out because they would have to take one G5 champion. So that would be Liberty. Right. Liberty and Florida State are the only ones that would not be in the Big Ten of the SEC.
No, so absolutely. Look, we can call it the power. Well, it's not even a Power 5 anymore. Farewell to the Pac-12. It was fun while it lasted. The reality is right now, in terms of the power brokers of the conference of college football in particular, it is a Power 2. It is the Big Ten and the SEC. The Big 12 and the ACC are trying to stake their claim, and they're being loud, and they're doing all of these different things to support their schools. But right now, it is Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey's world, and they're making the rules right now.
And I think that's the reason why we need that on wax.
Mm-hmm.
We need that. We need that on the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth? Like we need the thing that we all know, the peculiar situation. We need that actually verbally expressed and said, so that we all know. Okay, so now again. So when people say, "Why do we need to do these things?" We need it said. So now a judge is going to look like, well, what are the ways to get into the Big Ten, SEC? How do you? Nobody really wants all of these things done. That's why, again, Florida State is in the situation where just give us what we want, or we will burn this thing down. And the crazy part is, we got a governor that's crazy enough to really do this, and he sits there for 2 more years. And there's probably going to be another one that follows him that's just like this. So, like, for all of our sanity, if we don't want this, please just find a better way. That's all. My bad, Mark.
No, you're good. George, appreciate you being here. This is George Georgitis, of course, the Renegade Report. George, we'll let you chime in since you were the next one on board.
Yeah, no, I kind of caught the tail end of that one, and like, hey, I get it, man. If Duke's okay with their $39 million, and that's kind of goes back to the whole negotiations and Florida State giving the ACC a chance the past couple of years to try to work something out. It's like, if you're okay with less, then let's do the unequal revenue sharing. Let Florida State get their 15%, and everybody's happy. But they decided they wanted to just let ACC die to prove a point, and so it is what it is, you know. At this point, it's a power 2. I agree with what he said.
Although the Big 12, even though it's a power 2, the Big 12 is at least stabilized.
Mm-hmm.
They have their
as a group of conference.
Yes, so they're going to have at least 1 seat at the table for every college football playoff, if not 2. And they will be okay in that fashion. They will make money. Their games are going to be on national television. They'll make money. They may not be nationally competitive. I don't see any of those programs competing for a national championship, even though they have a entry into the playoff. But one point to be made, and then clarification, and then one question for Tony. One would be that we talked about the distribution at one point being equal of postseason play, and then there was a change made. And I remember when that came down, that was in late May, but I'm not finding the details weren't released. So we don't know how disproportionate that distribution is. We just know that they've addressed it.
Correct.
So I don't know where that stands.
Yeah, a minuscule drop in the bucket compared to what Florida State was talking about as far as what would keep us in the conference. Like,
sure, absolutely.
They did do something, but
the
it's
pie's
like
still too small. Regardless,
we need 15%. Period. If we're staying in, then we need 15% of that pie.
It was Jim Phillips sticking a Band-Aid on a gaping wound,
sure,
just to try and appease Florida State and Clemson and the top tier of the conference until other things rolled along.